Tonight on Dreadful Visions, we're looking at what happens when the world goes quiet and you are left responsible for a place that feels completely different after everyone else has gone home. Working alone at night can seem peaceful at first. There are fewer people, fewer distractions, and fewer problems to deal with. But when something goes wrong at 2 in the morning, there may be nobody nearby to tell you that what you are seeing is not normal. Sometimes the hardest part of working the night shift is not staying awake. It is knowing what to do when you realize you are not actually alone. Story 1. The night guard saw someone enter the hospital. 32-year-old Marcus Reed had worked overnight security at a large hospital outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, for nearly 4 years. He knew the building better than most employees did. He knew which elevators moved between floors, which stairwells were usually locked, and which corridors stayed empty after visiting hours ended. His job was mostly routine. Check the emergency exits, walk the main floors, watch the security cameras, respond when nurses needed assistance. Most nights were quiet enough that Marcus could spend hours sitting in the security office while the monitors showed the same empty hallways over and over again. The hospital never truly closed, but certain parts of it became almost deserted after midnight. The upper floors were especially quiet. One of them had been partially closed for renovations after several patient rooms were damaged by a water leak. The entire floor was supposed to be off-limits until the work was finished. Employees needed special permission to enter. Security was supposed to keep the stairwell door locked. At 1:18 a.m. on a Thursday, Marcus noticed movement on camera 14. The camera covered the northern stairwell on the 4th floor. A person in dark clothing walked through the corridor and disappeared around the corner. Marcus frowned. He rewound the footage. There was no doubt about it. Someone had entered the closed floor. Marcus checked the access log. The stairwell door had been opened at 1:17 a.m. using an employee access card. That made things easier. Someone with a valid badge had gone upstairs. Marcus called the overnight nurse supervisor to ask whether anyone was working on the 4th floor. She said nobody should be there. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and headed upstairs. When he reached the 4th floor, the hallway was completely dark except for the emergency lights glowing along the walls. The renovation crew had removed most of the furniture, leaving several patient rooms empty and stripped down to bare walls. Marcus walked slowly through the corridor. Nothing. He checked the rooms. Empty. He reached the far end of the floor and found the stairwell door still closed. There was nowhere else to go. He returned to the security office and reviewed the footage again. This time, he noticed something strange. The person on camera 14 had entered the hallway, but the camera covering the next section never showed them leaving. Marcus checked the other cameras. Nothing. No elevator movement. No stairwell activity. No exit door opening. It was as though the person had simply disappeared between 2 cameras. Marcus called his supervisor. Together, they reviewed the access logs. The badge used to enter the 4th floor belonged to a nurse who had left the hospital nearly 40 minutes earlier. Marcus called her. She was home. Her badge was in her purse. The supervisor told him to keep the 4th floor locked and wait until morning. Marcus returned to the camera monitors. At 2:03 a.m., the same person appeared again. This time, they were standing outside one of the closed patient rooms. Completely still. Marcus zoomed in. The person was facing the room door. After several seconds, they slowly raised one hand and touched the handle. Marcus watched them pull the door open. Then the screen went black for exactly 3 seconds. When the image returned, the hallway was empty. Marcus immediately checked the camera system. Everything else was functioning normally. He pulled up the feed from the room itself. There was a camera inside. The room was empty. But a second later, the door to the room slowly swung shut. Marcus stared at the monitor. He had one thought. Someone was still up there. And this time, they knew the cameras were watching. Marcus stayed in the security office for several seconds, staring at the monitor. The empty hallway. The closed patient room. The door that had just moved on its own. He picked up his radio and called the overnight supervisor again. "I need someone up here." The supervisor told him to wait for another guard who was doing a patrol on the lower floors. Marcus didn't want to wait. He grabbed his flashlight and headed back toward the 4th floor. As he reached the stairwell, he noticed something that made him stop. The access light beside the door was green. The door was unlocked. Marcus was certain he had locked it himself after returning from the first patrol. He pushed it open. The 4th floor was silent. He stepped into the hallway and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Only the low hum of the building's ventilation system. Marcus raised his flashlight and slowly walked toward the room he'd been watching on the cameras. When he reached the door, it was closed. He tried the handle. Locked. He checked his radio. Still working. Then he noticed a thin line of light beneath the door. Someone was inside. Marcus immediately stepped backward and called the supervisor. "There is definitely someone in this room." The supervisor told him not to enter. Marcus waited in the hallway until the second security guard arrived. Together, they opened the room. It was empty. Completely empty. There was no furniture, no medical equipment, and no place for anyone to hide. Marcus walked inside and shined his flashlight across every corner. Then the other guard noticed something beneath the old hospital bed frame that had been left against one wall during the renovation. A small black backpack. Marcus pulled it out. Inside were bottled water, food bars, a flashlight, several phone chargers, a change of clothes, and a set of hospital access cards. The cards belonged to different employees. Some were active. Some had expired. None belonged to the person Marcus had seen on camera. Police were called. While officers searched the floor, Marcus returned to the security office and went through the footage from earlier that night. This time, they watched every camera surrounding the 4th floor together. The person had not disappeared. They had used the blind spots between the cameras. The hospital had been undergoing renovations for months, and several cameras had been temporarily repositioned. There were narrow sections of hallway that were not visible from either direction. The suspect had learned exactly where those gaps were. But there was still one question. How had they entered the building? Police checked the badge records again. The nurse's access card had definitely been used. Then investigators noticed something unusual. The card had been scanned at the 4th floor stairwell only seconds after the nurse had left the hospital. Security footage from the parking garage showed her driving away almost 20 minutes before the access log recorded the card being used. Someone had copied her badge. The search of the 4th floor continued until officers discovered a maintenance hatch inside a locked utility room. Behind it was a narrow service passage running between the walls. The passage connected the closed 4th floor to an old storage area near the loading dock. Inside, investigators found another sleeping area. There were blankets, empty food containers, several stolen employee badges, a small radio, and a notebook filled with hospital schedules. The suspect had been living inside the building, but the notebook revealed something even more disturbing. It contained names and work times for nurses, doctors, cleaners, and security guards. Some entries had notes beside them. Leaves at 7, usually alone. Uses east stairwell. Walks to parking garage. Marcus found his own name on the final page. Next to it was a note. Night guard checks 4th floor at 1:20. Police later determined the suspect was a former hospital contractor who had learned the building's layout while working there several years earlier. He had been using the abandoned sections as a place to hide while stealing medication, equipment, and employee information. The person Marcus saw on the cameras that night had not been trying to scare him. He had simply been moving through the building while avoiding detection. The blackouts on camera 14 had been caused by a small device that temporarily interrupted the feed whenever the suspect passed through a blind section. He knew exactly how much time he had before Marcus noticed. The man was arrested 3 days later after police found him hiding in a vacant property on the other side of the city. Marcus continued working overnight security, but his routine changed. He stopped assuming an empty hallway was actually empty. He checked every locked door twice. He watched the cameras more carefully, and whenever he saw movement somewhere it shouldn't be, He never looked away from the screen, because the part that stayed with Marcus wasn't discovering the hidden room. It wasn't the stolen badges. It wasn't even finding his own name in the notebook. It was remembering the moment the camera went black for 3 seconds. Because during those 3 seconds, the person upstairs knew exactly where Marcus was, and Marcus had no idea where they were. Story 2. The voice came from the warehouse. 29-year-old Ethan Brooks had been working the overnight shift at a large distribution warehouse outside Dallas, Texas, for almost 2 years. His job was simple enough. He operated a forklift, moved incoming pallets, and helped prepare outgoing orders before the morning crews arrived. The warehouse was enormous. During the daytime, dozens of workers moved through the loading areas. Forklifts crossed the concrete floors, and trucks constantly came and went through the large bay doors. After midnight, almost all of that disappeared. Only 3 employees normally worked the overnight shift. Ethan usually preferred it that way. There were fewer supervisors, less noise, and no customers asking questions. Most nights, the hours passed without anything unusual happening. On a Wednesday morning in January, Ethan arrived just before midnight and noticed the warehouse seemed quieter than usual. One of the other workers had called in sick. The second was assigned to the loading dock. That meant Ethan was handling most of the main warehouse by himself. Around 1:20 a.m., Ethan was moving a pallet of boxed electronics toward the far end of the building when he heard someone call his name. Ethan. He stopped the forklift. The voice had come from somewhere behind the storage aisles. He looked around. Nothing. He waited. Then it came again. Ethan. It sounded like his coworker, Jason. Ethan shut off the forklift and climbed down. He called back, asking where Jason was. No answer. He checked his radio. Jason was still listed on the loading dock channel. Ethan assumed he'd misheard the voice and returned to work. 20 minutes later, it happened again. Ethan. This time the voice came from the opposite side of the warehouse. He looked toward the tall storage racks. Nothing moved. The warehouse stretched farther than he could see, with rows of shelving disappearing into darkness beneath the high ceiling. Ethan picked up his radio. Jason, was that you? Static. Then Jason finally responded from the loading dock. I'm still downstairs. Ethan felt uneasy. He asked whether anyone else was in the building. Jason said no. Only us. Ethan continued working. At 2:04 a.m., he heard the voice again. Much closer this time. Ethan. He turned immediately. The voice had come from the aisle directly behind him. Ethan grabbed his flashlight and slowly walked toward it. The aisle was empty. There were pallets stacked on both sides and a few boxes lying on the floor, but nobody was there. He checked his phone. No missed calls. No messages. He radioed the warehouse supervisor. The supervisor told him to stay in the main work area and avoid entering the far storage section alone. That answer bothered Ethan. Why? Had someone been trespassing before? The supervisor didn't explain. Instead, he said he would check the cameras from the office. 5 minutes later, the supervisor called back. He had seen nothing. According to the cameras, Ethan had been alone in that area the entire time. Ethan returned to his forklift. For the next 30 minutes, nothing happened. Then, at 2:41 a.m., the voice came through the warehouse intercom. Ethan. This time it wasn't coming from the aisles. It was coming from the speakers mounted high along the walls. Ethan looked up. The intercom system was only used for company announcements. Nobody was supposed to be using it during the overnight shift. Then the voice spoke again. Come to the loading bay. Ethan froze. Jason's radio suddenly crackled. Ethan, don't go. The transmission ended immediately. Ethan stood alone between the warehouse racks. For the first time that night, he seriously considered leaving the building. But before he could move, the warehouse doors at the far end began slowly rolling open. Cold air poured inside. And somewhere beyond the open loading bay, someone called his name again. Ethan remained beside the forklift, staring toward the open loading bay. The warehouse doors had rolled up almost 3 feet. Cold air moved through the building, carrying the smell of rain and diesel from outside. He looked at the control panel beside the door. The switch was in the locked position. Nobody should have been able to open it from inside the warehouse without a key. Ethan immediately picked up his radio. "Jason, where are you?" No response. He tried again. Nothing. Then his radio crackled. A voice answered. "Ethan." It sounded exactly like him. Ethan dropped the radio onto the forklift seat. For several seconds, he simply stared at it. Then he heard footsteps outside the loading bay. Slow footsteps. Someone was walking toward the open doors. Ethan grabbed his phone and called the supervisor. The supervisor answered immediately. Ethan explained what was happening. This time, the supervisor didn't tell him to calm down. He told Ethan to stay inside the main warehouse and lock himself in the shipping office. Ethan asked where Jason was. The supervisor paused. "He's not on the loading dock." That made Ethan's stomach drop. The supervisor explained that Jason had left the loading area nearly 20 minutes earlier to check a truck on the opposite side of the building. He hadn't returned. Ethan grabbed his keys and headed toward the shipping office. As he crossed the warehouse floor, the overhead speakers crackled again. "Ethan, don't hide in there." The voice sounded closer, almost amused. Ethan reached the office and locked the door behind him. He pulled down the blinds and called the police. While waiting, he kept the phone on speaker so the dispatcher could hear what was happening. Then footsteps began moving through the warehouse. Not outside. Inside. Someone was walking between the storage racks. The dispatcher told Ethan to remain quiet. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then the voice came through the warehouse intercom again. "Ethan, you left your forklift running." He looked through the office window. His forklift was still sitting exactly where he'd left it. The engine was off. The voice was lying. A few minutes later, police arrived at the warehouse entrance. Officers entered with their weapons drawn and searched the building systematically. They found Jason near the loading dock. He was unharmed but confused. He had been locked inside the cab of a delivery truck after hearing someone move around behind him. Police eventually discovered how the stranger had entered. A former temporary employee had been secretly using an unfinished section of the warehouse as a hiding place. He had access to old maintenance corridors that connected the loading area to the office wing. Inside the hidden space, officers found blankets, food, stolen electronics, several employee uniforms, and a small collection of radios. They also found something that explained the voice. The warehouse intercom system had an old recording function that could be triggered from a maintenance panel. The suspect had recorded employees speaking during earlier shifts. He had collected their names and voices, then used those recordings to make the calls sound real over the speakers. He had been watching the overnight crew for weeks. The goal wasn't simply to scare them. He had been stealing expensive electronics from outgoing shipments and using the fake announcements to separate employees from the areas he wanted to enter. When Ethan heard his name from different parts of the building, the suspect was moving between hidden sections and using the intercom to make Ethan believe he was being followed. The final warehouse door had been opened remotely from the maintenance corridor to make Ethan think someone was waiting outside. Police later discovered the suspect had been inside the building on several previous nights. Nobody had noticed because he knew the warehouse layout better than most current employees. Ethan stayed at the company for another year, but he refused to work the overnight shift alone again. The warehouse eventually changed its access system, sealed the old maintenance corridors, and replaced the intercom controls. Still, Ethan never forgot the moment he heard his own voice come through the speakers. Because the stranger hadn't simply learned his name, he had spent enough time listening to learn exactly how to sound like him. Story 3. The gas station wasn't empty. 26-year-old Tyler Mason had been working the overnight shift at a gas station outside Amarillo, Texas, for a little over a year. The station sat beside a long stretch of highway surrounded by flat farmland and scattered truck stops, making it one of those places that stayed busy during the day but became almost completely isolated after midnight. Tyler actually liked working nights. The pay was slightly better, customers were fewer, and most of his shift involved restocking drinks, cleaning the coffee machines, and sitting behind the counter while the security monitors showed an almost empty parking lot. There was usually one other employee with him until midnight. After that, Tyler was alone. His manager had told him that being alone overnight was normal. The station had cameras covering the pumps, the parking lot, the entrances, and the small storage area behind the shop. There was also a panic button beneath the counter that connected directly to local police. Tyler rarely thought about it, until one Saturday night. Around 1:40 a.m., he was wiping down the counter when the entrance door opened. A man walked inside. Tyler looked up. The customer appeared to be in his early 40s, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He walked directly toward the refrigerator section without saying anything. Nothing about him seemed unusual. Tyler went back to cleaning. A few minutes later, the man approached the register carrying a bottle of water. He placed it on the counter. Tyler scanned it. The man paid with cash, thanked him, and left. Completely normal. 10 minutes later, the same man walked back inside. Tyler recognized him immediately. The man picked up another bottle of water. When he reached the register, Tyler smiled politely and asked whether he'd forgotten something. The man shook his head. Just wanted another one. Tyler thought it was strange, but not strange enough to care. The customer paid again and left. 20 minutes later, he returned. This time he didn't buy anything. He simply walked inside, looked around the store, and stood near the coffee machine. Tyler watched him from behind the counter. "Can I help you with something?" The man smiled. "Just waiting for someone." Tyler nodded and returned to his work. The man remained there for several minutes before walking outside. Tyler watched through the window as he crossed the parking lot. There were almost no cars. The man walked toward a dark pickup truck parked near the edge of the property. Then he stopped. He didn't get inside. He simply stood beside it, watching the gas station. Tyler looked away. A few minutes later, he glanced back. The man was gone. The pickup was still there. At 2:35 a.m., another car pulled into the gas station. A woman driving a small SUV stopped at one of the pumps and went inside to buy coffee. As she approached the counter, Tyler noticed something. She looked nervous. She asked whether the station's cameras covered the entire parking lot. Tyler told her they did. The woman glanced toward the windows, then quietly asked if Tyler had seen a man in a dark jacket. Tyler froze. He described the same customer. The woman nodded. "He's been following me." She explained that she'd first noticed the pickup several miles back. Every time she changed lanes, it changed lanes too. When she slowed down, it stayed behind her. Eventually, she pulled into the gas station because she wanted to stop somewhere with cameras. Tyler immediately looked toward the parking lot. The dark pickup was gone. He told her she could stay inside as long as she needed. She thanked him and stood near the counter while Tyler watched the security monitors. For almost 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, camera 3 showed headlights entering the parking lot. The same dark pickup. It drove slowly past the pumps before disappearing behind the building. Tyler switched between the cameras. Nothing. Then the woman noticed something on one of the monitors. "That's him." Tyler zoomed in. A figure was standing behind the gas station near the dumpsters. The man was facing the building. Not the pumps. Not the road. The building. Watching them. Tyler reached beneath the counter and quietly pressed the panic button. A faint red light appeared. The woman noticed. She stepped closer to the counter. "Do you think he followed me here?" Tyler looked at the monitor again. The figure behind the building had disappeared. He switched to camera 6. Nothing. Camera 7. Nothing. Then the entrance door behind them suddenly unlocked. Tyler looked up. He hadn't touched it. The woman whispered his name. Tyler slowly turned toward the glass doors. Someone was standing outside. The same man from earlier. And this time, he wasn't carrying a bottle of water. Tyler remained behind the counter, staring through the glass doors. The man stood outside without moving. His hands were empty. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of his cap, but Tyler could see enough to recognize him immediately. The woman beside the counter stepped backward. "That's him." Tyler nodded. The panic button beneath the counter had already been activated, but there was no sound to confirm anyone had received the alert. The man outside raised one hand. Not a wave, more like a small gesture telling them to wait. Then he walked away from the doors. Tyler watched him move toward the side of the building. He disappeared from view. The woman asked whether there was another exit. Tyler pointed toward the rear employee door. He had never liked using it at night, but it led directly into a fenced service area connected to the neighboring truck lot. They could leave through there and reach the highway without passing the man. Before they could move, headlights appeared through the front windows. A police cruiser pulled into the gas station. Tyler felt a wave of relief. 2 officers entered the store and immediately asked what was happening. The woman explained that someone had been following her. Tyler showed them the security footage. The officers reviewed the recordings and then went outside to inspect the parking lot. They found the dark pickup parked behind the gas station. The driver's door was open. Nobody was inside. One officer walked around the vehicle and looked through the windows. Then he noticed something unusual. The pickup contained several printed photographs. Each showed different gas stations along the same stretch of highway. Some were taken during the day. Others were clearly taken late at night. The photographs weren't focused on the buildings. They showed the customers, people filling their cars, truck drivers walking toward the doors, workers cleaning pumps. One photograph showed the woman from earlier. She had been photographed at another gas station almost 30 miles away. The police immediately understood that this was not a random encounter. The man had been following her long before she arrived at Tyler's station. But there was another problem. The suspect himself was nowhere around. Officers searched behind the building, around the dumpsters, and through the neighboring truck lot. Nothing. They reviewed the gas station cameras again. At 2:35 a.m., the man entered the store. At 2:46, he left. At 2:55, he returned. At 3:02, he walked around the side of the building. After that, the cameras never showed him again. One officer checked the timestamps more carefully. There was a blind spot between the gas station and the neighboring property. An old section of fencing created a narrow passage that wasn't visible from any of the cameras. They searched it. Behind several abandoned pallets, they found a backpack containing bottled water, extra clothing, several prepaid phones, binoculars, and a notebook. The notebook contained dates, license plate numbers, and handwritten descriptions of people who regularly stopped at different gas stations. The woman recognized several locations. The suspect had been watching travelers who stopped alone at night. Police believed he followed certain drivers for long distances, learning their habits before approaching them at isolated stops. Most of the people he observed probably never realized they had been followed at all. The woman's decision to enter Tyler's station had interrupted whatever he planned to do next. The man was arrested 2 days later after police identified the pickup from another surveillance camera several counties away. Investigators discovered that he had been using different vehicles and fake license plates while following travelers across Texas and New Mexico. They also found evidence connecting him to several harassment and stalking cases that had never been linked. Tyler kept working at the gas station for another 6 months. But after that night, he stopped treating the security cameras as something that simply made the building feel safer. He started checking the parking lot before every customer left. He checked behind the building. He checked the truck spaces. And whenever someone came inside more than once during the same shift, he remembered the man with the bottle of water. The part that stayed with him wasn't the confrontation. It was how normal the entire thing had looked at first. A customer buying a drink. Someone standing near the coffee machine. A truck parked outside. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make most people feel threatened. Until all those small details suddenly meant something else. And that's what frightened Tyler most. Because sometimes, the person following you isn't the person you notice on the road. It's the person who waits until you finally stop. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment telling me which of these 3 stories unsettled you the most, and subscribe to Dreadful Visions for more realistic horror stories built around ordinary places and situations that can turn terrifying without warning. New long-form videos are uploaded every other day, and there are plenty more stories coming. Until next time, trust your instincts, pay attention to the people around you, and remember that sometimes the safest place you can find it in the morning isn't as empty as it looks. Sleep well tonight, if you can.